My daughter-in-law banished me from Christmas with 5 little words. We're keeping it small, Carol. Just family. She smiled when she said it, a tight, polite little smile that never reached her eyes, and in that moment, she made it clear I wasn't family anymore. That one sentence was the start of it all. The catalyst that led me to unravel a decade of quiet betrayals and financial deception. They thought they were just removing me from a holiday. They had no idea that within a week, I'd be removing them from the house they lived in, the bank accounts they leached off of, and the inheritance they took for granted. They thought I was a quiet, gentle old woman they could push aside. They were about to find out how wrong they were. This story is a difficult one to tell. But I have to, because I know I'm not the only one who has ever felt this way. Before we get into the painful details of how it all fell apart, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. It's a little after 2 p.m. here in Ohio on a quiet Thursday. Tell me what city or country you're in, and what time it is for you. It helps me feel a little less alone in all of this. Now let me take you back to that evening. It was the first Tuesday of December, and the first real snow of the season was coming down in those big fat lazy flakes that stick to your eyelashes. The world outside felt hushed and peaceful. I was humming a Christmas carol as I pulled into my son Mark's driveway in Columbus. The warmth from the car heater, a welcome friend against the chill. I felt a familiar flutter of happy anticipation. Tuesdays were my day with the grandkids, Sophie and Liam. A simple ritual. I'd pick them up from school, we'd bake something, and I'd help them with their homework until Mark or Ashley got home. It was the anchor of my week. In my passenger seat was a tin of my grandmother's ginger cookies, still warm from the oven, tied with a bright red ribbon. The whole car smelled of cinnamon and molasses. My grandchildren would devour them in minutes. It was a simple tradition, one of the few I still had a hold on. I knocked on the door, expecting to be pulled into a whirlwind of childish energy, of hugs and squeals of grandma. Instead, the door opened just a crack. My daughter-in-law, Ashley, stood there, blocking the entrance. She was already dressed in expensive-looking cashmere loungewear. Her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect sleek ponytail. A glass of white wine was in her hand. "Carol," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "What a surprise." It wasn't a surprise. It was Tuesday. "Hi, Ashley. I just baked these for the kids," I said, holding up the tin, the red ribbon a slash of cheerfulness against the gray evening. "Thought I'd drop them off while they're still warm. Are they ready to go?" She didn't move. She didn't open the door any wider. Her eyes flickered down to the cookie tin and then back to my face, her expression unreadable. "That's sweet of you," she said, though her tone suggested it was anything but. "But I was just about to put them to bed. It's a school night." "Oh," I said, confused. "It's only 4:30. They have a big day tomorrow," she said dismissively. Then she paused, as if a thought had just occurred to her. That's when she said it. The line that changed everything. "And Carol, while you're here, Mark and I have been talking. We're keeping Christmas small this year. Just family. You understand, right? Just family." The words hung in the cold air between us. I felt something cold and sharp pierce through my chest, a physical pain that took my breath away. I couldn't move. I just stood there on her perfectly shoveled porch, holding a tin of cookies that suddenly felt ridiculously heavy. My presence at Christmas, a tradition I had hosted for 40 years, was now an option she had decided to decline. But the real blow came a second later. I saw movement behind her. It was my son Mark. My only child. He was standing in the hallway, half hidden in the shadows, and as my eyes met his, he gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. Quiet, complicit nod that said, "Yes, Mom. She speaks for me. She speaks for us." That nod hurt more than her words ever could. It was an act of silent betrayal that severed something deep inside me. I finally found my voice, a weak, thin sound. "Oh, I see." Ashley's smile widened slightly. "Great. I knew you'd understand. We just want a quiet one this year, no fuss." She took the cookie tin from my numb fingers, her touch brief and dismissive. "I'll give these to the kids in the morning," she said, and then she closed the door in my face. Not unkindly, just finally. Like closing a book she was finished reading. I stood there for a long time, the snow starting to collect on my shoulders, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. Little did I know this casual cruelty was just the tip of the iceberg. The final push I needed to see the terrifying truth I had been ignoring for years. I don't remember driving home. It's a complete blur of white flakes and the blurry red of tail lights in front of me. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The windshield wipers seemed to be whispering the same words over and over. Just family. Just family. As if my husband David and I were suddenly strangers. As if 40 years of motherhood, of scraped knees, of bedtime stories, of paying for college, had just been demoted. When I finally pulled into our own driveway, the house was warm and glowing. The Christmas lights David had put up last weekend twinkled cheerfully, a stark contrast to the cold void that had opened up in my chest. He was in the living room reading by the fire. He looked up when I came in, his smile ready, but it faded the second he saw my face. He didn't have to ask. I walked to the kitchen counter and placed my empty purse where the cookie tin should have been. My voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. They're doing their own thing for Christmas. David just nodded once, a slow, sad nod. He'd seen it coming, I think, even if I hadn't wanted to. He'd seen the subtle shifts, the slow erasure that I had tried so hard to pretend was just the way things are now. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackling of the fire. The lights on our own tree blinked too brightly. Later that night I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs and sat in my old armchair, the one I always sat in when I needed to think. And the memories, the ones I had so carefully packed away and labeled as misunderstandings, began to surface. One after another, they came flooding back, each one a small cut that had finally added up to a mortal wound. I thought about the quilt. When Sophie was born, I spent almost a year making her a baby quilt. It wasn't just a blanket, it was a story. I used squares from my own wedding dress, from Mark's baby blanket, from one of David's old flannel shirts. I hand-stitched tiny animals and stars, my fingers raw and calloused. I poured all my love for my first grandchild into that quilt. When I gave it to Ashley at the baby shower, she'd held it up for a moment, a polite smile on her face. "Oh, Carol," she'd said, her voice flat. "That must have taken a while." Then she'd folded it and placed it on the bottom of the gift pile. The next time I was at their house months later I saw it. It was folded up in the garage, on a dusty shelf next to some old paint cans. When I'd asked about it, she'd waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, it's just too precious to use. I'm saving it." It was never seen again. Then there was the album. For Mark's 40th birthday 2 years ago, I had wanted to give him something truly special. I spent 6 months compiling it. I went through dusty boxes in the attic, finding every photo I could of his life. His first steps. His kindergarten graduation. The time he won the science fair. His awkward teenage years. His wedding day. I carefully arranged them all in a beautiful custom-made leather-bound album, with handwritten notes next to each picture, telling the story of the boy I had raised. It was a labor of love, a piece of my heart in book form. He seemed to love it when he opened it. He'd hugged me and said, "Thanks, Mom. This is amazing." 3 months later, I got a phone call from an old neighbor, Diane. Her voice was hesitant. "Carol, this is a strange question," she'd said. "But I was at the Goodwill over on 3rd Street, and, well, I think I found something of yours." She described the album perfectly. She'd recognized my handwriting. She bought it for $5 and brought it back to me. It was sitting on my bookshelf right now, a monument to my own foolishness. When I'd confronted Mark about it, he'd been flustered. He'd handed the phone to Ashley. Her voice was a placid stream of excuses. "Oh my goodness, Carol, I am so sorry," she'd said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Things just get so cluttered around here with the kids. It must have gotten mixed in with a pile of old magazines we were donating. What a terrible mistake." A mistake. A 6-month project of love. A 40-year history of my son's life, mistaken for an old magazine. At the time I had chosen to believe her. I had forced myself to accept the apology because the alternative was too painful to consider. That it wasn't a mistake at all. That this piece of my heart had been deemed clutter, and tossed aside without a second thought. I had buried that hurt deep down. But now, sitting in the dark, it clawed its way back up, raw and bleeding. And as I stared into the dying embers of the fire, I realized the album wasn't an accident. It was a message. Last Thanksgiving, our house was filled with the warm, chaotic energy of family. Or at least what I thought was family. My sister Sarah was there, our nieces and nephews, and of course Mark, Ashley, and the kids. I'd spent 2 days cooking, making sure every dish was perfect, from the turkey to Mark's favorite pecan pie. The day was a blur of refilling glasses, cleaning up small spills, and making sure everyone was happy. I was exhausted, but it was a happy kind of tired. Late in the afternoon after the big meal, I slipped into the kitchen to grab a glass of water and have a moment of peace. The house was loud with laughter and conversation from the living room. As I stood by the sink, I heard voices from the hallway just outside the kitchen door. It was Ashley talking to one of her friends, a woman named Jessica. They were speaking in low, confidential tones. I knew I shouldn't listen, but I froze my hand on the faucet. I just don't know how much longer we can have her host, Ashley was saying. Her voice was laced with a kind of performative concern that she had perfected. Honestly, Jessica, it's getting to be a lot to handle. Jessica murmured something I couldn't hear. It's her memory, Ashley continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She's starting to get forgetful. She put salt in the coffee this morning instead of sugar. And last week she called Liam by Mark's name. I'm worried about her being alone with the kids for too long. We have to be so careful now. I stood there, my body rigid, my blood turning to ice in my veins. None of that was true. Not a word of it. I hadn't put salt in the coffee. I'd never confused my grandson with my son. They were lies. Calculated, cruel lies. She was painting a picture of me as a frail, incompetent old woman who was losing her mind. She was building a case against me, laying the groundwork to justify pushing me out. The hostess who couldn't be trusted. The grandmother who was a liability. The friend Jessica clucked sympathetically. Oh, that's so tough. You're such a good daughter-in-law to be so patient with her. I try, Ashley sighed, the sound of a martyr. But we're thinking next year it would be easier and safer for everyone if we just hosted at our place. Keep it simple. I felt the air leave my lungs. So that was her plan. It wasn't just about control, it was about character assassination. She wasn't just taking over the holidays. She was creating a narrative that made it seem like a necessary act of kindness. The loving daughter-in-law, stepping in to save the day from the dotty old matriarch. The betrayal was so profound, so venomous, it almost made me physically ill. I crept away from the door before they could see me, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd said nothing. I'd swallowed that poison just like I'd swallowed everything else, telling myself she didn't mean it, that I was being too sensitive. Now, I know some of you listening might be thinking, Carol, why on earth did you let that go? Why didn't you confront her right then and there? And honestly, I've asked myself that 1,000 times. But when you're in it, when you love your son and your grandchildren more than anything, you make excuses. You choose to believe the best. Even when the worst is whispering right in your ear. You tell yourself that keeping the peace is worth the price of your own feelings. I see now that it was a fool's bargain. What would you have done? If you'd overheard something like that about yourself, would you have confronted them? Or would you have stayed silent like I did? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to know. Because that night, sitting in my dark living room, I finally understood. She wasn't just sidelining me. She was trying to erase me, painting me as incompetent to justify her cruelty. And suddenly, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. An even older, deeper betrayal that I had tried my best to forget. The house wasn't the first time. My mind, now that the floodgates were open, dredged up a memory from about 12 years ago, not long after Mark and Ashley were married. Mark was ambitious, I'll give him that. He was working a steady but boring corporate job and he hated it. He came to us one evening, his eyes shining with excitement, a laptop full of presentations. He had an idea for a tech startup, some kind of app for organizing local sports leagues. He was convinced it was the next big thing. All I need is some seed money, he'd said, his voice buzzing with energy. Just enough to hire a developer and get a prototype built. Once we have that, we can go to venture capitalists and get real funding. Ashley had sat beside him, nodding enthusiastically, her hand on his arm. We believe in this so much, Carol, she'd said. It's Mark's dream. This is our chance to build a real future for ourselves, for our future kids. The amount he needed was staggering to us, $50,000. It was a huge chunk of our savings, money we had earmarked for a new roof and a kitchen renovation. David was skeptical. He was a practical man, an engineer, and he saw the holes in Mark's business plan. "It's a big risk, son," David had said gently. "The market is saturated with apps like this. What's your unique selling proposition?" Mark's face had fallen. Ashley immediately jumped in, her voice taking on a slightly wounded tone. "David, it's not about the market. It's about believing in your son. I thought family was supposed to support each other's dreams." She'd framed it as a test of our love, a tactic I now recognize as her specialty. Of course I'd sided with Mark. I saw the passion in his eyes and my heart melted. I couldn't bear to be the one to crush his dream. I'd convinced David. We'd talked about it for weeks, and eventually, my desire to see my son happy won out over my husband's practicality. We gave him the money. We didn't sign a contract. It was a loan we all agreed, but it was a family loan. "I'll pay you back from the first round of funding," Mark had promised, hugging me tightly. "With interest. You won't regret this, Mom." But we did. The startup went nowhere. The developer he hired took the money and delivered a buggy, unusable app. The venture capitalists weren't interested. Within a year, the entire $50,000 was gone, with nothing to show for it but a defunct website and a mountain of Mark's broken pride. He was devastated and my heart broke for him. When he came to us ashamed and said he couldn't pay us back, I had immediately told him not to worry about it. "It's okay, honey," I'd said, patting his hand. "We'll be fine. Just think of it as a gift." At the time it felt like the right motherly thing to do. But now I saw it differently. We hadn't just given him a gift. We had taught him a lesson. We had taught him that our savings were his safety net. We had taught him that a promise made to us didn't really have to be kept. We had taught him that when it came to our finances, there were no consequences. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was the precedent. It was the foundation upon which the bigger, more devastating lie of the house would be built. He hadn't learned from his failure. He had learned from our forgiveness. And his wife, the ever-observant Ashley, had been taking notes the whole time. 4 years after the failed startup, Mark and Ashley came to us again. By this time, Sophie had been born, and Liam was on the way. They were living in a small starter home and were desperate for more space. They found their dream house in a nice Columbus suburb with great schools. But there was a problem. With Mark's student loan debt, the previous business failure on his record, and their modest incomes at the time, the bank wouldn't approve them for a mortgage that large. The scene felt eerily familiar. They sat at our kitchen table, spreading out papers and talking about their future, their dreams. This time Ashley did most of the talking. "It's for the kids, Carol," she'd said, her eyes wide and sincere. "We want them to have a backyard to play in, to be in a safe neighborhood. This house is perfect, but we just can't make the numbers work without some help on the down payment." Mark had chimed in. "It's just temporary, Mom. We just need a little help to get the loan approved. We've learned our lesson from the startup. This is different. This is a real asset." David, remembering the last time, was even more hesitant. But I once again was swayed. This wasn't a risky business venture. This was a home for my grandchildren. How could I say no to that? The amount they needed was even more staggering. $150,000. It meant pulling a huge sum directly from our retirement fund, the nest egg we had spent 40 years building. It was a massive risk. But Ashley had a solution. "To make you feel secure," she'd said with an air of brilliant compromise, "we'll put your names on the deed right alongside ours. That way you're legally protected. We'll write up an agreement to pay you back within 2 years. Once that's done, we'll refinance, your names come off, and it's like it never happened. It's a win-win." It sounded so reasonable, so responsible. This time we had a legal protection. We had a written agreement, which we all signed at the kitchen table. It wasn't notarized. Ashley had laughed and said, "We're family, we don't need to pay lawyers for something this simple." But it was a promise. A family promise. And I, a fool twice over, believed it was worth more than any lawyer's stamp. So we did it. We wrote them the check. We went with them to the bank and signed the mortgage papers. Our names went on the title. The first year there were no payments. "We're just getting settled," Mark would say when I gently brought it up. The property taxes were higher than we expected. The second year came and went. Still nothing. Their excuses became more elaborate. New braces for Sophie. An unexpected car repair. A new job for Ashley that required a new wardrobe. Meanwhile, their lifestyle was visibly improving. I saw the Facebook posts. A family vacation to Disney World. A brand new SUV in the driveway. Ashley showing off designer handbags. Their home, the one our retirement money had secured, became the backdrop for a perfect life they curated online. A life that, apparently, didn't include repaying the people who made it possible. I'd stopped asking about it around year 4. It was just too painful. Every conversation felt strained, and I didn't want to be the nagging mother-in-law. I told myself that they were just struggling, that they'd make it right when they could. I chose to believe in the son I had raised, not the man who avoided my calls when he knew I wanted to talk about finances. Now, sitting in the dark, the truth was blindingly obvious. They never had any intention of paying us back. The agreement was a lie to get what they wanted. For 8 years we had put our own financial security on the line, while they used our money as a stepping stone to a life they couldn't afford, all while slowly and systematically pushing us out of it. We weren't family to them. We were an investment that had matured, a resource that had been fully tapped, and now that they were comfortable, we were no longer needed. We were just a loose end. Clutter. As these painful memories swirled, another one surfaced, this one of a conversation between David and me. It was about a year ago. We were in the car, driving home after Liam's birthday party. The party had been tense. Ashley had been in full hostess mode, directing everything, and she had corrected me in front of her friends 3 separate times. Once when I put the wrong kind of napkins out, once when I cut the cake slices too thick, and once when I tried to start a game with the kids that wasn't on her meticulously planned schedule. Each time she'd smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, Carol, let me handle it. You just relax and enjoy yourself." It was a dismissal wrapped in the guise of kindness. I had been quiet on the drive home, staring out the window, the hurt coiling in my stomach. David had reached over and put his hand on my knee. "You know she's pushing you out, right?" he'd said, his voice quiet but firm. I'd bristled immediately, jumping to our son's defense as I always did. "Don't be silly, David. She's just a perfectionist. She wants things her way. It's her house, her party." "This isn't about her house," he'd replied, his eyes fixed on the road. "This is about control. She's been slowly taking over every single family tradition, every holiday, every decision. And Mark just stands there and lets her. He's like a different person when he's around her." "He's a husband and a father now," I'd argued, though my voice lacked conviction. "His priorities have shifted. That's normal." "Normal is one thing," David had said, his voice rising slightly. "Letting your wife treat your own mother like an incompetent employee is another. Carol, you make excuses for them constantly. You bend over backwards to keep the peace and all they do is take. The money for the startup. The money for the house. Your time, your energy, your recipes. And they don't even give you respect in return. When is it going to be enough?" I hadn't had an answer for him. I had just felt that familiar defensive anger rise up. It was easier to be angry at David for pointing it out than to be hurt by the truth of his words. "You're exaggerating," I'd snapped. "You've never liked Ashley." The car had fallen into a heavy silence. David had simply shaken his head, a look of deep sadness on his face. "That's not true and you know it," he'd said quietly. "I don't like what she is doing to our son. And I don't like what you're letting her do to you." We hadn't spoken about it again. But now, sitting in my armchair in the middle of the night, his words echoed in my mind, painfully clear. He had been right. He had seen it all, with the clear eyes of someone who wasn't blinded by a mother's desperate love. He had tried to warn me, and I had refused to listen. I had chosen my comfortable denial over his uncomfortable truth. I had not only enabled my son and his wife, but I had also shut out my own husband, the one person who was truly on my side. The weight of that realization was crushing. It wasn't just them I had to be angry with. It was myself for being so willfully blind for so long. I didn't have to wake David up. When I finally went upstairs, the sky outside just beginning to turn a bruised purple. He was sitting up in bed, waiting for me. He knew. He didn't press for details, just held out his hand. I sat on the edge of the bed and I told him everything. Not just about Christmas, but all of it. The quilt in the garage. The album found at Goodwill. The venomous whispers I'd overheard at Thanksgiving. the forgotten $50,000 for the failed startup, and the 8 years of lies and broken promises about the house. I laid it all out, every painful piece of the puzzle that I had been too afraid to assemble before. I also told him about our conversation in the car a year ago. "You were right," I whispered, my voice thick with tears. "You were right about everything, and I'm so sorry I didn't listen." He just pulled me into a hug, his strong arms a safe harbor in the storm that was raging inside me. "There's nothing to be sorry for," he said into my hair. "You were being a mother. But now it's time for us to be a team." With every word I spoke, I felt a weight lifting, a fog of denial clearing from my mind. I wasn't being overly sensitive. I wasn't imagining things. This was real. It was a calculated long-term campaign of disrespect and exploitation. When I finished, the sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across our bedroom. David was quiet for a long time, his face grim. I watched his expression shift from deep sadness for me to a simmering anger I hadn't seen in him in years, and then finally to something else. A kind of hard, cold clarity that mirrored my own. He finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "They think we're a bank account, Carol. An open line of credit with no due date. They think because we love Mark, we'll just roll over and accept whatever scraps of respect they feel like throwing our way." He shook his head. "They think we're weak." He looked me straight in the eye, and I saw the same fire in him that was burning in me. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right. We're done being silent." That was it. That was the moment everything truly shifted. It was no longer just my pain. It was our resolve. For the first time in years, we were united against a problem instead of me trying to manage it alone, trying to shield him from the ugly truth of what our son had become. We didn't sleep. We went downstairs and made a pot of coffee, and as the sun filled our kitchen with pale winter light, we started to make a plan. It wasn't a plan born of malice. We didn't yell or scream or talk about revenge. It was quiet, methodical, and absolute. We sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and a pen, like we were planning a household budget. But this was a budget for our survival. "First, the money," David said, his voice all business. "We need a full picture. We need to know exactly how exposed we are." "Then the house," I added. "We need to know our legal rights. No more family promises. This is about the law now." "And finally," David said, his voice softening as he looked at me, "us. Our future. What do we want the rest of our lives to look like, now that the old picture has been shattered?" By the time we finished our second cup of coffee, the path forward was clear. We would make 3 calls. One to our financial advisor. One to a lawyer. A new one, not the family friend we'd used for years. And one to a travel agent. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a threat. It was the careful, quiet dismantling of a relationship that had become toxic and unsustainable. It wasn't an act of war. It was an act of survival. And as I looked across the table at my husband of 45 years, his face set with a determination I loved so deeply, I knew we could do it. The next morning I made the first call. Our financial advisor, Denise, was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had managed our retirement accounts for the last 15 years. I told her I needed an urgent, in-person meeting. "It's a family financial matter," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I need a clear picture of everything." She fit me in that very afternoon. I walked into her polished downtown office with a folder containing every document I could find. The original loan agreement for the house, old bank statements, everything. David stayed home. We agreed this was something I needed to face first, to see the numbers in black and white myself. I sat across the wide mahogany desk from Denise and laid it all out. I told her about the unpaid $50,000 for the startup. I told her about the $150,000 down payment that was never repaid. I told her about my growing unease. I asked her to do a deep dive, to look at everything with a fresh pair of eyes and tell me what she saw. For an hour she worked silently, her fingers flying across her keyboard, pulling up accounts and statements I didn't even know we had. She printed out page after page, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence in the room was heavy, punctuated only by the soft click of her mouse and the whir of the printer. I watched the numbers and charts fill her screen, feeling a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and took off her glasses. She looked at me with an expression of deep professional concern. Carol, she began, her voice gentle but firm. The unpaid loans are a major issue, and they've seriously impacted your retirement projections. You're about 5 years behind where you should be. But I'm afraid I've found something else. Something more immediate. She turned her monitor around to face me. On the screen was the statement for a joint savings account. I vaguely remembered opening it years ago. This is the grandchildren's fund, she said. You and David set it up when Sophie was born as an emergency fund and college savings. You, David, and Mark are all listed as co-signers, so any of you can withdraw funds. My heart started to beat a little faster. We haven't touched that account in years, I said. It was just supposed to sit there and grow. Denise pointed to the screen. Mark has been touching it, she said quietly. She highlighted a line item. A withdrawal for $250. Then another a week later for $150. And another. And another. They were small, irregular amounts, the kind you might not notice unless you were looking for them. They went back 3 years. He's been making regular withdrawals, Denise said, her voice grim. It looks like he started right around the time he told you he couldn't afford to start repaying the house loan. I felt dizzy. How much? I whispered. Denise did a quick calculation. She wrote the number down on a notepad and pushed it across the desk to me. My eyes blurred as I read it. $38,750. Almost $40,000. Siphoned away in small, sneaky increments from his own children's future. But Denise wasn't done. Her expression was now grim. Carol, I need you to prepare yourself. She opened another window on her computer. It was Ashley's public Instagram profile. She started scrolling through the pictures, her mouse clicking with grim precision. Look at the dates, she said. She pointed to a withdrawal for $300 from the savings account, dated October 5th. Then she pointed to Ashley's Instagram post from October 6th. A picture of her and her friends at a high-end spa, sipping champagne, with the caption Treat Yourself Tuesday. Another withdrawal for $200 in August corresponded with a post of Ashley showing off a new designer purse. Caption: A little retail therapy. A series of withdrawals totaling over $1,500 in June matched up perfectly with their family vacation to an all-inclusive resort in Florida. A vacation they had told us they could barely afford. Transaction after transaction, post after post, the story became sickeningly clear. It wasn't for emergencies. It wasn't for the kids. It was their slush fund. Their personal ATM for luxuries we had to cut from our own budget years ago. They were stealing from their children's savings account to fund a lifestyle they were showing off to the world, while simultaneously telling us they were too broke to pay back the money they owed us. The audacity, the sheer, cold-blooded entitlement of it, knocked the wind out of me. I felt a wave of nausea. This was a level of deception I couldn't have imagined. This was a violation that went beyond family disagreements. This was theft, plain and simple. My hands were shaking as I left her office, the printed statements clutched in my fist. The hurt I felt before was now overshadowed by a white-hot, clarifying anger. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family squabble over hurt feelings. This was calculated, long-term financial abuse. And I was about to turn off the tap. I drove straight from Denise's office to pick up David. I didn't even go into the house. He saw the look on my face as he got in the car and simply said, "Where are we going?" "The bank," I said, my voice tight. "Right now." During the short drive, I explained what Denise had found. The secret withdrawals. The $40,000. The spa days and designer bags funded by their children's future. David didn't say a word. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his hands clasped so tightly on his lap that his knuckles were bone white. The silence in the car was more explosive than any argument could have been. We both knew, without saying it, that a line had been crossed from which there was no return. This was no longer just about our son being weak or our daughter-in-law being controlling. This was a fundamental betrayal of trust, a deep moral failing that we couldn't ignore. We walked into the main branch of our local bank, the one we'd been customers at since we were first married. We sat down with the branch manager, a kind woman named Patricia whom we'd known for years. "Patricia," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and clear, "we need to make some immediate changes to our accounts." I explained the situation simply and factually without emotion. I told her about the joint savings account and the unauthorized withdrawals. I told her we needed to protect our assets immediately. She listened patiently, her expression becoming more and more serious. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a quiet professionalism and, I thought, a flicker of sympathy. I understand completely, she said. Let's get this sorted out right away. For the next hour we went through every single account we owned. The first and most important step was the grandchildren's fund. We immediately froze the account. Then we had it restructured. We opened a new custodial account that listed only myself and David as trustees. The funds were transferred over, and Mark's name was scrubbed from it entirely. His access was severed, effective immediately. Next, we went through our own checking and retirement accounts. We put new security protocols in place. We changed passwords. We set up alerts that would notify us by text and email of any transaction over $50. We made sure there were no hidden backdoors, no lingering connections that could be exploited. Patricia was incredibly thorough, suggesting safeguards we hadn't even thought of. As David signed the final piece of paperwork, a sense of profound relief washed over me. It was a small step, a quiet one, but it was the first real action we had taken in our own defense in years. We weren't asking for permission. We weren't starting a fight. We were simply closing a door that should have been locked long ago. We were taking back control. We didn't call Mark. We didn't send a text. We didn't give them any warning. We just let the silence hang in the air, a ticking time bomb. They wouldn't notice today or maybe even tomorrow. But they would notice. Oh, they would definitely notice. As we walked out of the bank into the cold afternoon air, I felt a sliver of my old self return for the first time in years. The quiet competence, the feeling of being in charge of my own life. They would feel the consequences soon. But our next step, the one we had planned with our lawyer, would be the one they couldn't possibly ignore. Our appointment with the lawyer was the following morning. We chose a firm downtown, one that had no connection to our small suburban community. We wanted complete discretion. Our lawyer, Carla Mendez, was exactly what we needed. She was in her late 40s with a sharp mind, a firm handshake, and an air of calm authority that immediately put me at ease. There was no pity in her eyes, only a focused intensity. We sat in her quiet book-lined office and, for the second time in as many days, I told the whole story. I handed her our copy of the signed, but not notarized, agreement about the house. I gave her the deed with our names clearly listed as co-owners. I explained the 8 years of broken promises. Carla listened intently, taking meticulous notes. She asked pointed questions, her gaze never wavering. When I was finished, she leaned forward, her hands clasped on her large desk. First, she said, her voice clear and direct, let's talk about the agreement. Because it wasn't notarized, it's not as strong as a formal contract, but it is a powerful piece of evidence. It clearly shows intent and the original terms you all agreed to. It establishes a moral and financial obligation that they have clearly violated for 8 years. That validation felt like a bomb on a raw wound. It wasn't just in my head. We weren't just being unreasonable. Now let's talk about the deed, she continued, tapping the document with her pen. This is your leverage. Your names are on this title as joint tenants. Under Ohio law, that gives you significant rights. You are just as much an owner of that property as they are. David finally spoke, his voice heavy. So what can we do, Carla? We don't want to drag this through the courts for years. You won't have to, she said with a reassuring confidence. You have a very clear and powerful option. It's called a partition action, or a partition sale. Essentially, as a co-owner, you have the legal right to force the sale of the property if the other owners are unwilling to buy you out. She let that sink in. Force the sale. The words were terrifying and liberating at the same time. Here's how it works, Carla explained. We will send them a formal letter, a demand letter from my office. It will state that they have breached your agreement and that you are now demanding to be bought out of your share of the property for the original $150,000, plus a reasonable amount for appreciation. We will give them a deadline, say 30 days, to respond with a formal plan to secure financing and buy you out. And if they can't? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Carla's expression was unyielding. If they cannot or will not buy you out by the deadline, The letter will state that you will immediately file a petition action with the court. The court will then order the property to be sold at public auction. Once it's sold, the proceeds will be used to pay off the existing mortgage, and then the remaining equity will be split among the owners according to their shares. You will get your money back. The sheer, unstoppable legality of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a messy, emotional fight. It was a clean legal procedure. They would have two choices: find a way to pay us what they owed us or lose the house. Do you want to proceed? Carla asked, looking from me to David. I looked at my husband. I saw the pain in his eyes, but also the same steely resolve I felt in my own heart. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about the lie. The 8-year-long lie they had been living at our expense. I turned back to Carla and nodded. Yes, I said, my voice firm. Please draft the letter. Walking out of that law office, I felt a strange sense of peace. The ball was now in motion, following a path of legal logic that they couldn't argue with or manipulate. We weren't just taking back money, we were taking back our power. But there was one final step to secure our future, and it was the most painful one of all. After the logistics of the house were settled, there was one last piece of business with Carla. It was the one I had been dreading the most, the one that felt the most final. Our will. David, Carol, Carla said, her tone softening slightly. Given the circumstances, I strongly advise you to review and update your estate plan. As it stands now, your son Mark is your primary beneficiary. Is that still your wish? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My son. My only child. The boy I had rocked to sleep. The man whose wedding I had danced at with tears of joy in my eyes. For my entire adult life, the answer to that question had been an unspoken, unequivocal yes. Everything we had built, everything we had saved was for him. It was the natural order of things. But the order had been broken. The trust had been shattered. I thought about the stolen money from the grandchildren's fund. What would he and Ashley do with a significant inheritance? Would they be responsible stewards of our life's work? Or would they see it as a final winning lottery ticket, to be squandered on more spa days and designer bags, the way they had squandered our trust? I already knew the answer. The image of the Goodwill album, the memory of the lies about my mental state, flashed in my mind. An inheritance wouldn't be a blessing to them. It would be a reward for their bad behavior. It would validate everything they had done. I looked at David, and he gave me a slow, sad nod. He was leaving the decision to me, but I could see in his eyes that he agreed. This wasn't about punishing Mark. It was about protecting what was left of our legacy, and most importantly, protecting our grandchildren from their parents' greed. My voice was thick with emotion when I finally spoke. No, I said, the word catching in my throat. No, that is no longer our wish. It was the hardest word I have ever had to say. It felt like a betrayal of my own motherhood, a final heartbreaking admission of failure. But it was also an act of profound protection. I understand, Carla said gently. We can structure this in a way that still provides for your grandchildren, while ensuring the assets are protected. Over the next hour, she outlined a plan to create what she called an ironclad, irrevocable trust. Our entire estate, the house, our savings, our investments, would go into this trust upon our passing. My younger sister, Sarah, a wonderfully responsible and kind woman, would be named as the trustee, the manager of the fund. The terms of the trust were explicit. The money was to be used only for the health, education, and well-being of our grandchildren, Sophie and Liam. Mark and Ashley would have no control over it, no access to it. They wouldn't be able to touch a single penny. The trust would pay for college tuition directly to the university. It would cover major medical expenses directly to the hospital. When each grandchild turned 25, they would receive their half of the remaining inheritance directly. It was a brilliant, heartbreaking solution. It was a way to show our grandchildren how much we loved them, a final gift from beyond the grave, while simultaneously protecting that gift from the irresponsibility of their own parents. It was the last act of love we could offer them. Signing the new will felt like signing a death certificate for the relationship I once had with my son. Each stroke of the pen was a final goodbye to the man I thought he was. When it was done, I felt hollowed out, an aching emptiness where a mother's hope used to be. But I also knew we had done the right thing. For a few days there was an eerie silence. The demand letter from Carla's office had been sent by registered mail. We knew they would have received it. The bank had surely blocked any attempted withdrawals. Yet there was nothing. No angry phone calls. No panic texts. It was the calm before the hurricane. And the quiet was almost more unnerving than an explosion would have been. I imagined them sitting at their kitchen table, staring at the legal document, the reality of their situation slowly dawning on them. I imagined them trying to access the savings account and finding it empty. What were they thinking? Were they plotting? Were they panicking? The not knowing was a unique form of torture. David and I used that time to take care of ourselves. We went for long walks in the snowy woods behind our house. We ate quiet dinners by the fireplace. We talked about everything except Mark and Ashley. We talked about our future. About the trips we'd always wanted to take. For the first time, that future felt like it was truly our own again, not something that was being held hostage by someone else's expectations and demands. It was during one of those conversations that David had an idea. You know, he said, looking at a travel magazine on the coffee table. Why should we wait? Why don't we go somewhere for Christmas? Just us. The idea was so radical, so completely out of character for us that I almost laughed. We had never been away for Christmas. Not once. But this year was different. There was nothing keeping us here. No family dinner to host. No grandchildren's excited faces to watch on Christmas morning. Staying home in our festively decorated house would just be a painful, hollow reminder of what we had lost. Let's do it, I said, a real smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. We spent the next day planning. We didn't want to go far. We wanted peace and quiet. We found the perfect place. A beautiful historic and nestled in the Hocking Hills, just a couple of hours away. It was famous for its cozy fireplaces, gourmet food, and scenic snow-covered trails. We booked a suite for 5 days, from Christmas Eve to the day after. I even went out and bought a new dress, a deep emerald green velvet that made me feel elegant and hopeful. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was planning something for me, not for everyone else. The night after we booked the trip, I was scrolling through my phone. I saw the family group chat that Ashley had created years ago, the one I was mostly silent in. It was filled with her perfectly staged photos of the kids and gushing captions about her wonderful life. On a sudden impulse, I decided it was time I posted something of my own. It wasn't a hostile act. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was simply a statement of fact. A declaration of our independence. I found the website for the Hocking Hills Inn. I saved a beautiful professional photo of its entrance at twilight, covered in a blanket of snow, with glowing lanterns lighting the stone path. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. I opened the group chat. My fingers trembled slightly as I attached the photo. Then I wrote a simple caption beneath it. Thank you for giving us the chance to create something new, just for ourselves this year. Feeling so blessed. I hit send. Then I put my phone on the charger in the kitchen, face down. I didn't want to watch for the little dots that signaled someone was typing a reply. David and I went into the living room and put on an old black and white movie. We tried to lose ourselves in it, to pretend that I hadn't just lobbed a beautifully wrapped grenade into the middle of our fractured family. 2 hours later, when the movie was over, I went back into the kitchen for a glass of water. The screen of my phone was lit up, pulsing with notifications. It looked like an airport runway at night. It was an absolute deluge. 32 missed calls. 17 voicemails. 48 text messages. The storm had finally broken. My hand was trembling as I picked up the phone. David came and stood behind me, his hand a comforting weight on my shoulder. Put it on speaker, he said, his voice grim. I swiped open the screen and started with the voicemails. The first one was from Mark. His voice was tight with a panic I hadn't heard since he was a teenager who had crashed his first car. Mom? Mom, call me back immediately. What is going on? I just tried to pay the mortgage online and the payment was declined. Our joint account says the funds are insufficient. Did you move money? This is a huge problem. Call me. Click. The next voicemail started. It was Ashley. Her voice wasn't panicked. It was sharp, cold, and laced with indignant fury. Carol, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but it stops now. We just got a letter from some lawyer. A letter about selling our house. Our children's home. Are you insane? Are you trying to make us homeless? After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us? By threatening our family? You need to call this lawyer and call this off immediately. I am not kidding. The sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of her words, after everything we have done for you, left me speechless. Done for us? We'd funded their lives for 8 years. The next message was Mark again, his voice cracking now. Mom, seriously, what is this about the house? Ashley is freaking out. You can't just do that. That's our home. We need to talk. This isn't funny. Then came a voice I hadn't expected. It was Ashley's mother, Karen, a woman who always looked down her nose at our modest home, who always made subtle digs about my clothes and my cooking. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but the condescension was unmistakable. Carol dear, she began. Ashley called me, and she is absolutely beside herself. I know you must be feeling a little emotional lately, perhaps a bit confused. But this is incredibly manipulative and unhealthy behavior. You're punishing those precious children because your feelings got a little hurt over a holiday plan. You are a grandmother. You need to start acting like one and stop this pathetic, childish drama immediately. For the good of the family. Pathetic drama. Confused. Childish. They were using the exact narrative Ashley had been building for years. That I was the unstable one. That I was the problem. And on it went. Voicemail after voicemail. Text after text. They were a torrent of accusations, demands, and righteous indignation. Not a single message asked how I was feeling. Not a single one expressed remorse. Not one of them said, maybe we should have treated you better. It was all about them. Their mortgage. Their house. Their inconvenience. Their outrage that the bank of Mom and Dad had suddenly, without warning, closed its doors. I felt a strange calm settle over me as I listened. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in my chest. But for the first time it was being overshadowed by a profound sense of validation. Their panicked, entitled reactions were proving what I already knew. They didn't miss us. They didn't love us in the way we loved them. They loved what we provided. They were furious not because they had lost their mother, but because their ATM had been shut down. It was Mark's final pleading voicemail, left sometime after midnight, that truly broke my heart all over again. Because in it, I finally heard a flicker of something other than anger. I heard fear. And in that fear, I knew a confrontation was inevitable. He was coming. Hey everyone, I just need to take a quick pause here. Thank you so much for your patience and for sticking with my story. It means the world to me. If you're still here with me on this journey, please just comment the number 1 down below so I know you're here. It's incredibly encouraging. Okay, back to the story. He came the next morning. A frantic text message at 7 a.m. simply said, I'm on my way. We need to talk face to face. He didn't ask if it was okay. He just announced it. 3 hours later, a familiar gray sedan, dusted with road salt and snow, pulled into the driveway. David asked if I wanted him to be there with me. I shook my head. No, I said. This is between my son and me. It has been for a long time. I watched from the kitchen window as Mark got out of the car. He looked exhausted. He hadn't shaved, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He stood by his car for a full minute, just staring at the house, as if trying to gather the courage to walk to the door. Finally, he took a deep breath and started up the walkway. I met him at the door. I didn't invite him in. I just stepped outside onto the cold porch, pulling my cardigan tighter around me. The air was frigid, and our breath plumed in front of us. Mom, he said, his voice raw. He looked lost like a little boy again. Mark, I replied, my voice even. I was determined not to cry, not to yell. My calmness seemed to unnerve him more than shouting would have. You blindsided us, he started, his voice thick with accusation. The bank, the lawyer. A picture of some fancy hotel? What are you trying to do, Mom? Are you trying to destroy us? I raised an eyebrow. Did I? I asked quietly. Or did I just finally stop letting you destroy me? He had the grace to look down, to look ashamed. He kicked at a patch of snow on the porch. It wasn't supposed to be like this, he mumbled. We didn't mean to shut you out. It's complicated. Ashley feels. I don't want to hear what Ashley feels, I interrupted, my voice still quiet but with an edge of steel he hadn't heard in years. I want to hear about you, Mark. It wasn't complicated when you took the $50,000 for a business that went nowhere and never paid it back. It wasn't complicated when you took the $150,000 for the house and never paid that back either. It wasn't complicated when you let your wife throw away a gift I spent 6 months making. It wasn't complicated when you stood there in the hallway and nodded like a puppet while she kicked me out of Christmas. And it certainly wasn't complicated all those times you dipped into your own children's savings account to pay for her luxuries. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and guilt. He had no idea I knew about that. How did you? I am not stupid, Mark. I am just patient. Or at least I was. I took a step closer, my voice dropping even lower. For years I have been speaking to you. I was speaking to you with my silence. Every tradition I let go of without a fight. Every disrespectful comment I swallowed. Every time I sat quietly while your wife rewrote our family's history. I was screaming at the top of my lungs. You just chose not to listen. Tears started to well in his eyes. Real tears. I know, he whispered, his voice finally breaking. I know, Mom. I messed up. I messed up so badly. He looked up at me, his face a mask of misery and desperation. Ashley, she made me feel like I had to choose. She said you were always trying to control our lives, to make everything about you. She said if I didn't stand with her, I didn't stand with my own family. I was a coward, Mom. He finally said it. The truth. I was so afraid of losing her and the kids, I didn't realize I was losing you. He tried to justify it, to explain the pressure he was under. She would say things like if I didn't back her up, I was disrespecting her as my wife. That I was still a little boy tied to his mother's apron strings. It was easier to just agree. To keep the peace at home. Peace at home? I asked, my voice incredulous. You bought peace at home with my dignity, Mark. With your father's retirement savings. That's not peace. That's a hostage situation. The confession was years too late, but it was there. He wasn't a monster. He was just weak. And his weakness, his fear of his own wife, had allowed all of this to happen. He had traded his integrity for a quiet life. He asked the question I knew was coming, the one I had been dreading. Is there any way to fix this? Can we undo it? I looked at the son I had raised, this stranger standing on my porch, and I told him the honest, painful truth. I looked past him at the bare winter trees lining our street. The world looked so stark and clear in the cold morning light. I felt that same clarity inside myself. There was no more fog, no more making excuses for him. There was only the truth. Fix it, I said, my voice soft but unwavering. Mark, this isn't a broken toy you can just glue back together. This is a shattered trust. And I don't know if it can ever be truly fixed. He took a step toward me, his hands outstretched as if to plead. But we can try, Mom. I'll talk to Ashley. We'll figure out a payment plan for the house. We'll pay back the savings account. Whatever you want. I held up a hand, stopping him. This isn't about the money anymore, I said, and I was surprised to find that I truly meant it. The money was just a symptom of the disease. The disease was a profound lack of respect and a gaping void of integrity. The lawyers will handle the money. That part is no longer a family matter. It's a business transaction. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. The word business between a mother and son was a cold, hard thing. What I want, I continued, looking him straight in the eye, is something you can't just write a check for. I am done being convenient. I am done being a line item on a budget you feel entitled to. I am done being the silent, smiling wallpaper in your perfect life. I love Sophie and Liam more than words can say, but I will not sacrifice my own dignity just to be near them. A grandmother shouldn't have to buy her way into her family's life with silence and compliance. So this is it, he asked, his voice cracking. You're just done with us? The finality in his tone was heartbreaking. I saw a flash of the little boy who used to cry when I left him at kindergarten. But I couldn't let that memory weaken my resolve. I had to be strong for both of us. I am done with the dynamic we had, I clarified. I am done with this version of our relationship. I will always be your mother, Mark. And I will always love you. But love and a relationship are two different things. Love is a feeling. A relationship is a two-way street built on mutual respect. And our street has been a one-way for a very long time. I told him what needed to happen. It had nothing to do with me. He needed to find his own backbone. He needed to go to therapy both by himself and with Ashley. He needed to understand why he let his wife systematically dismantle his relationship with his own mother. He needed to become a man who could stand on his own 2 feet, not one who hid behind his wife's decisions. Maybe one day, I said, my voice softening just a little. When you've done the work, when you're ready to see me as your mother again, not just a solution to your problems or an obstacle to your wife, maybe then you can come visit. Alone. And we can try to talk. Really talk. He stood there for a long moment, the tears freezing on his cheeks. He just nodded slowly, the fight gone out of him. He didn't argue. He didn't make any more promises. He just turned, walked back to his car and drove away. Watching his car disappear down the snowy lane, I didn't feel triumph. There was no victory in a mother having to deliver an ultimatum to her only child. I felt a profound sadness for the relationship we had lost. But underneath it, I also felt freedom. The silence that followed his departure was a deep, healing peace I hadn't known in a decade. The 2 weeks that followed the confrontation were the quietest I had known in years. Christmas came and went. David and I went on our trip to the Hocking Hills. It was wonderful. We hiked on snowy trails, read books by a roaring fire, and ate delicious meals we didn't have to cook or clean up after. We talked for hours, reconnecting in a way we hadn't had time to in years. It felt less like a vacation and more like the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. My phone remained off for the entire 5 days. When we came home, there were no more angry messages. The legal process was moving forward, impersonally and efficiently, through Carla's office. They had officially responded to the demand letter, through their own lawyer, stating that they would be attempting to secure a loan to buy out our portion of the house. The fight had moved from our porch to the sterile world of legal correspondence, and honestly, it was a relief. It took 4 long, stressful months. There were negotiations, paperwork, and moments when I thought it would all fall apart. But Carla was a rock, and our legal position was unshakable. Finally, one day in late April, it was over. A cashier's check for our full investment, plus a modest amount for appreciation, arrived at Carla's office. We went in and signed the final papers, removing our names from their deed forever. Walking out of the law office that day, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The financial ties that had bound us in such a toxic way were finally severed. That evening, David and I opened a bottle of champagne. What should we do with it? I asked, looking at the bank slip on the table. It was a substantial amount of money that was supposed to be our safety net for old age. David smiled, a real carefree smile I hadn't seen in a long time. I think, he said, clinking his glass against mine, we should stop thinking about safety nets and start living. What's that trip you've been talking about for 30 years? 2 months later, we were on a plane to Italy. We spent 3 weeks there. We saw the Colosseum in Rome, we drifted through the canals of Venice, and we drove through the sun-drenched hills of Tuscany. We ate pasta and drank wine and walked until our feet ached. One afternoon, we were sitting at a small cafe in Florence, watching the world go by. I was wearing a new linen dress, feeling the warm sun on my face, and I felt a sense of peace that was so profound, it almost made me want to cry. For so many years, my happiness had been tangled up in my role as a mother and a grandmother. I had believed that my worth came from being needed, from serving my family. I had made myself small to keep the peace, and in the process I had almost disappeared entirely. Sitting there thousands of miles from home, I wasn't a mother or a grandmother. I was just Carol, a woman drinking a cappuccino in a beautiful city next to the man she loved. And it was more than enough. I felt a sense of freedom, of possibility that I thought was gone forever. We had taken the money that was a symbol of our pain and betrayal, and we had turned it into a new beautiful memory that was entirely our own. It was the first and most important step in reclaiming our lives. When we returned from Italy, tanned and rested, a new rhythm had settled into our lives. The house was quieter, but it was a peaceful quiet, not an empty one. The legal battle was over, the financial ties were cut, and the storm had passed, leaving behind a kind of calm clarity. The silence from Mark was absolute. I didn't know if he was angry, if he was hurt, or if he was actually taking my words to heart and starting the hard work of self-reflection. I had to let go of the outcome, to accept that I had done all I could do, and the rest was up to him. My main connection to that part of my life was my email correspondence with Sophie. It had become our special, secret ritual. Her emails were a window into her world, and sometimes a heartbreaking glimpse into the state of her home. "Hi, Grandma," one email read. "We had a parent-teacher conference today. Mommy and Daddy went. They didn't talk to each other in the car at all. It was really quiet. Mrs. Davison said I was doing great in math. I wanted to call you and tell you, but I didn't know if I was allowed." I wrote back immediately, praising her for her good grades and telling her a funny story about a time her dad struggled with long division. I kept it light, but my heart ached for her, caught in the middle of a silent, cold war she didn't understand. Another email a few weeks later. "Daddy is working late a lot. Mommy bought a new painting for the living room. She said we needed to freshen things up. Liam misses you. He asked when we were going to your house for cookies again. Mommy told him we were all too busy." Each message was a small, painful reminder of the collateral damage. But our letters were also a lifeline of normalcy for her, and for me. We talked about books she was reading, her soccer games, her friends. I sent her pictures from our garden, and she sent me drawings she'd made in art class. We were building a new kind of relationship, one that was just ours, independent of her parents. It was a bond forged in sincerity and love, and it was becoming one of the most precious things in my life. Then, one cold afternoon in mid-January, an email appeared in my inbox with a subject line that just said, "Hi, Grandma." My heart leaped into my throat. It wasn't from Sophie. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, a school district email. It was from my granddaughter. I clicked it open, my hands trembling. The message was short and simple, written in the charmingly imperfect grammar of a 10-year-old. "Hi, Grandma. I miss you. I miss your ginger cookies. Christmas was weird this year. Mommy is sad all the time and Daddy is really quiet. He stays in his office a lot. I got an A on my history project. I wanted to tell you. My teacher said my presentation was the best in the class. Can we write letters? Like email letters? I won't tell Mommy if you don't want me to. I just miss talking to you. Love, Sophie." I sat there staring at the screen, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I cried. I cried deep, racking sobs, not of anger or hurt, but of a heartbreaking, overwhelming love. This email, this small, brave act of reaching out from my granddaughter, was a pure and beautiful thing in a world that had become so ugly and complicated. It wasn't about money or houses or manipulation. It was just a little girl who missed her grandma. It was a connection that Ashley, for all her control and maneuvering, had not been able to sever. It was a tiny seed of hope planted in the middle of a frozen landscape. That email from Sophie was the start. We began a quiet, steady correspondence, just between the two of us. I told her about our trip to Italy, and she told me about her school play. I helped her with her homework over email, and she sent me funny pictures of her dog. It was a small, precious connection, a relationship being rebuilt one honest sentence at a time, far away from the toxicity of her parents. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my son. He texts me occasionally now, short, simple messages on holidays or my birthday. "Happy birthday, Mom. Thinking of you." I reply just as simply, "Thank you, Mark." It's not forgiveness, not yet. It's not even a conversation. But it's not hatred either. It's a quiet, uncertain space, and for now that has to be enough. The future of our relationship is in his hands. He has to do the work. But this story isn't really about Mark or Ashley anymore. It's about me. It's about a woman who remembered who she was before she allowed herself to be diminished by 1,000 tiny cuts. I learned that my peace is not negotiable. I learned that my silence is not a virtue when it comes at the cost of my self-respect. I learned that setting a boundary isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of self-preservation. I am not just a mother or a grandmother or a wife. I am Carol, and I am enough. The greatest lesson in all of this is that age is not a synonym for weakness. It is a testament to survival, and it should be worn as a mantle of dignity. If my story resonates with any of you, if you have ever been made to feel small, invisible, or like a convenience in your own family, please know this. You are not alone. Your peace is not something you should have to beg for, and your dignity is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. I won't be afraid to tell the truth anymore, even if it hurts, because the truth in the end is what set me free. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Means more than you know. If you have a similar experience, a time when you had to draw a line in the sand to protect yourself, please share it in the comments below. Your stories give strength to all of us who are navigating these difficult family dynamics. And if you found value in this story and want to hear more about finding your voice and standing your ground, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. You are all a part of a wonderful community, and I am so grateful for each and every one of you.